Hello and welcome to the Nerdiest podcast, episode 18. Episode 18 of the Nerdiest podcast on Spotify. I am Charles the Nerdiest, and today we are going to be doing another hot takes episode. So comic book hot takes, movie hot takes, games hot takes. I don't know how many times I'm going to say hot takes this episode. But it's going to be a lot because there are a lot of hot takes that I have gathered, over the course of the past couple of weeks. If you have messaged me your hot takes or commented on my TikTok about the hot takes, you will be featured in this video. And I think they're really good. So we previously did do a hot takes episode on the Nerdiest podcast. I believe it's like episode 3 or 2. But go check that out because I think that's probably my favorite. It's really cool. I really enjoyed doing it because you get to see people's opinions. It's not just my opinion, which is mainly what this podcast is, right? It's pretty much me just talking my own, it's just me talking to myself, but you're like indulged. I don't know what I'm saying, but you know what I mean. It's nice to get the opinions of other people on these topics that I'm very passionate about. You know, comics is something that I've really enjoyed getting into. You know, I wouldn't say I'm new to comics. I'm pretty much a comic nerd at this point. I've collected omnibus editions, trades, singles. I'm collecting ongoings. I'm doing my Nerdiest podcast. We have gathered some hot takes for this episode. We have got some that are talking about movies, TV shows, comic books. So yeah, let's get into some of these hot takes and strap in because it's going to be awesome. Just talking about some people's opinions. And yeah, it's going to be so awesome. Stay tuned. So, yeah, guys, I want to start this off with a really strong, powerful, hot, spicy take, you know? Let's find one that's really, really spicy then. If I do mispronounce your name, I'm sorry, but let's go with Finn on TikTok. He says, Infinity War and Endgame ruined the MCU. So obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Those are the films. You know, you got Captain America First Avenger, you got, obviously Infinity War and Endgame. And he's saying that they ruined the MCU. They tainted the MCU. Now this is a really hot take in my opinion. I think this is really, 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 really hot. Like it's on fire, dude. But yeah, let's talk about it. Infinity War and Endgame ruining the MCU is very strong. I think they definitely did have a lasting impact, obviously, because they are so big. They're such a big staple in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but also in comic book movies. And I think, in my opinion, it maybe shook the MCU a little bit too in the wrong direction, right? So if you think about it, we had Avengers 1, then we had Avengers Age of Ultron. Let's talk about all the Avengers leading up to Infinity War and Endgame. So we had Avengers 1, which was Loki and the whole army coming to Earth, and you know, that was a really strong start to the Avengers MCU films, right? Then we had Age of Ultron, which is obviously Ultron as the baddie in that film. And those two are really strong, I think. Really, really, really good. Not as impactful, in my opinion, as Infinity War and Endgame. Endgame and Infinity War both chose to do some really bizarre and maybe controversial takes on these characters, right? I'm thinking Thor, I'm thinking Hulk, and I'm thinking Iron Man in Endgame. I'm thinking who else? I think they're good. They're very good films, very good, strong Avengers films. But obviously they chose to do stuff with characters that maybe pissed people off. Fans of the comics, fans of the previous Avengers films may have, if you grab Endgame specifically and compare it to, the first Avengers, for example, and you put like Hulk in that film versus Smart Hulk in Endgame, and then you do Fat Hulk versus, not Hulk, what am I talking about? Fat Hulk, what? And then you got, Avengers 1 Thor, and then you compare that to Fat Thor in Endgame. And it's just like, well, how did you went from Avengers 1 to Age of Ultron, and then how did you end up there? Like, it's crazy to me. And I think that transition between Infinity War and Endgame may be where you're pulling this from, like it ruined the MCU. I think it was, there was a 5-year gap where half the population was blipped, right? Including some of the Avengers, Spider-Man, Star-Lord, I'm blanking, Black Panther, right? They all blipped, right? The characters you had left were sort of separated, and then they all came together, and then they killed Thanos. And they thought that was the end of it. And I think the translation of characters from comics to screen will always be different and always be challenging and always be sort of a bit shaky, right? Comic books are a medium in itself that are very sort of exaggerated. You could do so much in a comic book. You can, have a guy swinging from buildings and Thor having lightning everywhere. You could do that in a film, but it won't be as colorful, as impactful than having it in a little panel. You know what I mean? I think in my opinion, I don't think they ruined the MCU, those two films, Infinity War and Endgame. I don't think they ruined the MCU. I think, personally, they shook the MCU and sort of, like a train on a track. They sort of shook the train off the track, if that makes sense. And it sort of derailed and spiraled out of control. I think the popularity of those films is something that, obviously Infinity War was the most successful one out of the two, I think. Man, it's difficult because they're so good. I love them personally. And they have sort of flaws with characters that make no sense and are just there for comedy beats, right? Comedic timing and I think Thor specifically, may have been derailed the most because, like I said, compare him to Avengers 1 and to Endgame, he's a comedy character. He's like, Ant-Man. He's like, sort of like Rocket almost, in the sense that he's made fun of because he's fat and depressed because he didn't go for the head or whatever reason he's all depressed and stuff. Yeah, but then, speaking of Thor, right? It's really weird because after Endgame, if you think about that, they go and do Thor Love and Thunder, which is the redemption of Thor. He works out and he gets rid of that fat Thor persona, whatever you want to call it, era or whatever. Which I think's great. It shows character development for sure. So, but then obviously that film also has flaws. Thor Love and Thunder is very sort of like, controversial in the fact that they still make fun of him even though he's not a comedic character. I think they approach the film as being a comedy, but I don't think that works for Thor. The problem with Thor in the MCU is he's a very serious God of Thunder character in the comics. Yes, he has comedic beats in that first Avengers film, but I think in that first Avengers film, that was the most Thor, in my opinion, because he's sort of stoic. He's sort of a god. You can see him being a god of thunder. Whereas in Thor Love and Thunder, or Love of Thunder, whatever it's called, he's sort of that comedic character and sort of has lost his godlike nature almost. Which is a shame, because I think that film, Thor Love and Thunder, could have been the best Thor film. You had a really strong villain with a great actor. You had that CGI. You had that budget. And I bet you any money the fans of Thor wanted more Thor. You know, they wanted that stoic Thor. They were sick and tired of fat Thor. And then you could say that it's the same thing about Smart Hulk, right? They made some really quite weird decisions for some of the main Avengers as well. And then obviously killing Iron Man is a big moment in the MCU. You know, he's sort of like the anchor being of that time, I think. And, you know, that might play into Doomsday, which might change my opinions on why they decided that. But it makes sense for him to sacrifice himself. I really enjoy how Iron Man's developed over the Avengers films, and not necessarily his own films, but the Avengers films. Shows it really well, because he's working with a team of heroes, and I think Tony Stark contrasts working with a team of heroes. Like, he really shines working with a team. Whether he's working for himself, he's sort of just like, you know, classic Tony, right? But he sort of puts on that disguise when he's working with, you know, a team of Avengers. I'm not quite sure, but I think that was a really good idea to have him sacrifice him. It shows the development of the character, really well. But obviously that, like I said, that derails the sort of MCU, because now you have a really key player in the Avengers. You have a key player in Marvel, obviously Iron Man, killing himself, sacrificing himself for the rest of the Avengers. So we sort of talked about the sort of pre-Infinity War and Endgame stuff. What did the effect of having Endgame and Infinity War and having Iron Man sacrifice himself, what effects did that have on the MCU after? I'm thinking, like, you know, we had the Fantastic Four recently, and in my opinion, I think it's one of the strongest MCU films ever, because it's got that aesthetic that's very pleasing. It's very comic accurate, which is a very big thing for me. It needs to be very sort of comic book accurate and not it doesn't take itself seriously, which is another perk of that film. I like it. Other people don't like it. That's fine. That's your opinion. You know, that's your opinion. But I don't think it ruined the MCU in the sense that it ruined every film after. I think it maybe sort of, there was a sort of, when you set the bar too high with the Infinity War, and Endgame sort of films, the next couple of films are going to flop, because you're not going to reach that type of level again. So I'm thinking Miss Marvel. I'm thinking the Marvels. You know, those films that came out, they sort of started going towards TV shows after Avengers, Endgame. Sort of a WandaVision. And I think that was sort of maybe a bad thing to do. People going to, you know, Disney Plus may have contributed to that sort of ruin the MCU. I don't think going to TV shows was the best idea, in my opinion. But yeah, we talked about that. So, yeah, in my opinion, I don't think it ruined the MCU. I think the MCU is still really, really strong, going really, really strong after Endgame. Yes, it did have that sort of like, it did get derailed, and a few films came out that like severely flopped, and I can understand why you would say those films ruined the MCU, but I don't think it's ruined it forever. It's definitely on the rise, and I think we are going to see that with Avengers Doomsday and the next Avengers films. And obviously we've seen that in the Fantastic Four. Marvel, I think people are forgetting that it's Marvel. Marvel isn't going anywhere. It's been in comics for years and years. People still play Marvel Rivals. People still watch Marvel films. if you slap the company name Marvel on any film, anyone will go and watch it, even if it's like, I don't know, like a rip-off Superman with Marvel, like Marvel Man. If they make a film of Marvel Man, people will go see it just because it's Marvel and it's in that Marvel universe. So it doesn't necessarily ruin it, you know. I think the way you could have ruined it is if those films weren't successful. I think that they boosted the popularity of the characters, but not of the MCU. And sort of when you sort of have that end game, you want to develop those characters in those films. But what they did is they developed characters that weren't seen before, like Miss Marvel and stuff like that. Is it Miss Marvel? Yeah, it is, isn't it? I'm not sure. But it's just weird. I don't know. It's just a weird patch for the MCU, I think, after Endgame. But yeah, we've talked about that for a while. That's I don't think they ruined it. I think they sort of derailed the MCU. But yeah, that was by Finn on TikTok. That's a good one. That was a good one to start off. I'm very glad I did that one first. Let's go to the Soups Lad on TikTok. On TikTok? What the fuck? On TikTok. TikTok? Bro, I can't even talk today. Let's breathe. Okay, we got the Soups Lad on TikTok. There we go. He says there's not a single perfect live action Batman adaptation, which is kind of hot, right? That's kind of a hot take, right? Jeez, that's crazy. So as you guys know, I love Batman. I think he's an awesome character. And he obviously has that history in the comics, a long history in the comics, where it's sort of like he's been so many faces. Batman has been through so many eras of comics. So he's been through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and now we're in the 2000s. And, you know, it's just sort of, I think Batman, if you look at the whole history of Batman, just specifically Batman, but also other comic book characters, you'll see that they change and adapt to the era. So when you say there's not a perfect adaptation, I don't think there's a perfect modern Batman adaptation yet. Obviously we had Batman 89, which was in 89. That was probably the best Batman. You need to think that they take that adaptation from what's the comic history or where that character originates from. So the comic history is obviously going to be different in 1989 than today. They wouldn't have had, you know, New 52. They wouldn't have had, you know, Grant Morrison's Batman to reference, you know, just to name a few. You know, obviously nowadays we've got stuff like Absolute Batman, which is changing the game of what Batman could be, of what these characters are capable of. So it's, you know, it's ever evolving. Comics are ever evolving. And it's the same with movies. You go watch the comic book movie history podcast episode. You'll see that movies are ever changing to approach the times and to approach the target audience, right? So when you say there's not a perfect live action Batman adaptation, I will just have to agree with you. I think because the times are ever changing, especially nowadays, things don't stick around, right? Adaptations are going to be different. I really did like Matt Reeves' Batman just because it was sort of a Batman that we haven't seen before. Matt Reeves' Batman reminds me of the New 52 in the way that it reinvents the character. It also reminds me of Absolute Batman in the sense that it reinvents it, but not on that scale. But not on that scale of, you know, elaborate muscles and massive, like, weird cape and all that stuff. It's sort of, it's a new, fresh take on the character, which I really appreciate. Yeah, I love that film, and I'm excited for part 2 to come out. But would I say it's the perfect Batman adaptation? I wouldn't say at all. No, I wouldn't say it's the perfect. I would say the most faithful we've had so far. You know, we've had Batfleck, we've had Michael Keaton, we've had, God, this is testing me now, the 1966 Batman, I forgot his name, the actor. We've had loads of different Batmen over the time. And like I said, they just adapt to what's relevant to try and engage that target audience. But I say we haven't had a perfect adaptation of Batman yet. I think it's possible. It is 100% possible. I think Batman's one of the easiest comic book characters to portray in live action because he's just a dude. He's not Superman, He's not, he's not Thor, He's just a dude and he's got loads of gadgets and you've got to do that really well and you've got to do the whole Gotham really well. What would my perfect, so I think, what would my perfect Batman adaptation be? That's a good one. I'm thinking right now of like Batman Hush, like that blue suit with the, just like go crazy Batman, like put that sort of modern, I think Batman Hush was a comic series that was very modern. It modernizes Batman. And I think that's what if they do a DCU Batman, which they probably are, right? I would like to see that a lot. Just a Batman Hush, blue suit, massive Batcave. I want classic elements implemented into a modern suit with modern gadgets and sort of a modernized Batmobile. I think Matt Reeves' Batman is like the modernized version of Batman, but it's to the extreme. It's like so modern that it maybe forgets some of the comic book look. If you look at the Batmobile's very sort of modernized and not very Batmobilist. It's sort of like just a car, right? But it's still really good. I think it is in that approach of realism, right? But yeah, I think my perfect adaptation, who would I want cast as Batman in the DCU? I've seen, Nate Mann, isn't it? I like that guy. He's got like a nice face, but I've seen some other ones and I think they're all really good. I don't really care who's under the mask because I think anyone can play Bruce Wayne. He's just a billionaire playboy, right? But it's Batman as well. I think you need to be sort of buff and sort of fill out the suit nicely, but like I don't really care who plays him. I just want somebody behind the mask so that we can have the mask, which is Batman, if that makes sense. But yeah, I agree that we haven't had a perfect Batman adaptation with the blue suit, the yellow belt, the awesome Batmobile, the awesome slingshots and the, gadgets that he uses, the sort of, grappling hook. That would be really awesome to see in live action, right? I think that's a really good hot take by the Soups Lad on TikTok. Go check him out. Let's get into another hot take here. Okay, so we got Sully saying, hot take, Invincible series downs the popularity of the actual comic book. So obviously we talked about Invincible on this podcast already. I think that's a very hot take. He says the Invincible series downs the popularity of the actual comics. So when Invincible came out on, the show, the Prime, whatever it's called, it was a massive success in season 1. And you would think that would boost the comic book series. And it did, I think. I think it did. I think it's safe to say that, the series, is it the series that boosted the comics, or is it the fandom, making these edits and these sort of exaggerated lore? They're making up their own lore behind, the variants come to mind of Invincible. Maybe that boosts the popularity of the comics, right? Something that comes to mind that I'm seeing a lot of on TikTok is that very specific Invincible variants panel or page with all the panels, and all the Invincible variants inside that I've seen on TikTok, and people, a lot of people have been posting these stuff. So I think I don't think necessarily the show boosts the comic. I think the fandom of the show then boosts the comic, and they make these compendiums and people are buying the holy hell out of all of these compendiums, right? I think that's a great thing, though. I'm so glad that, the show isn't just, obviously the show is more popular than the comics, but I'm so glad that people are now starting to recognize Invincible as a comic book character and not a TV show character. I think his comic book run is very good, and I think it's very awesome to see and compare the show to the comic, right? But I'd have to disagree that the show downs the popularity of the actual comic, because I think it boosts it, and I think it boosts it pretty good. So something that comes to mind when I'm talking about like Invincible series versus the comics, right, is the Daredevil show. So I watched the Daredevil show not long ago, actually, and I loved it. I really liked it. And then I picked up my first ever Daredevil comic, The Man Without Fear, and I loved that. And then I got another one, and another one, another one. So it's sort of that you can compare, the Daredevil show versus the comics. You can compare those, right? To the Invincible show versus the comics. Yeah, it's like, I think it's opposites with the Daredevil show. I think the show I think it's the same. I think the Daredevil show boosts the comics. I think it's, when you put a comic book character in a film, and you finish that film, people are going to want to watch or read more of that character and know more about him. I don't know. I think it's just subjective to what you like. If you don't like comics, then you won't pick up the comics. That's fair, right? But yeah, I don't agree that the comics down the popularity of the show down the popularity of the comics, right? So yeah, we've got, Mr. Comics 123 on TikTok says, Hawkeye and Green Arrow are the same shit. So, I don't really know much about Hawkeye or Green Arrow. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really read those characters. But they're both archers. That's all I pretty much know. I think Green Arrow is pretty much based off of Robin Hood, right? That whole vibe of like sneakiness and stealthiness with a bow and arrow, and yeah, I think that's his whole vibe. I don't know much about the characters at all, so I think they are very similar, but obviously if you look at Hawkeye in the MCU, he isn't just an archer, or he definitely uses a bow, but he sort of is more of a agent like Romanoff, and I don't know if Green Arrow is an agent, but I think it's pretty much, I think it's fair to say that they are pretty much the same. If you get angry at me for saying that, it's not my hot take. I'm just agreeing with it, because they are pretty similar, Hawkeye and Green Arrow. I think one's green and one's purple, right? And they both carry a bow and arrow. But it's like the argument of who's popular. If they're not the same, if they're the same, then they're both going to be popular, right? No, not necessarily, because Hawkeye, he's been the Ronin, he's been all these different things, he's had his own comic runs. There's a Hawkeye comic that I think is very popular amongst the comic book community. Can't remember the name of it, but I remember the picture on the front. But yeah, I don't really hear much about Green Arrow. I don't really know that much about him. I know a little bit from the MCU of Hawkeye. I haven't really sat down and read a Hawkeye comic. But I think he's more, Hawkeye's definitely more popular than Green Arrow. At the end of the day, he's just got that MCU backing. But you never know. The DCU might introduce a really great Green Arrow, and he might get his own show, and then he might sacrifice himself for the Soul Stone or something like that. I don't know. Let's see. But yeah, that was by the comic, or Mr. Comics, 123, about Hawkeye and Green Arrow. Yeah, I think they're pretty similar, to be honest. I'm not gonna lie. I don't really see much difference in their characters. So let's get into another one right here. I don't know how to pronounce your name, but your name is a Joker card. But it's like the emoji of a Joker card on TikTok. I don't know what your name is. I'm sorry if you wanted a shout out. That was pretty lame as a shout out goes. But yeah, there you go. He says, really powerful characters like Goku are boring. I have to 100% agree on this take. I don't like... Okay, so first of all, I haven't read anime. I don't watch anime. I don't watch... I don't read manga. I've only seen Jujutsu Kaisen, like, for a couple of seasons. That was pretty cool, but I kind of forgot what happened in that. But really really powerful characters like Goku. Let's think of other examples, like, maybe in comic books, like a really powerful character, like Superman, right? He's pretty powerful. But is he boring? I wouldn't say he's necessarily boring. I would say he's sort of in a tough spot compared to everybody else. You know, if you compare Batman to Superman, Batman's probably the most popular because he's the guy with no powers. But because Superman has every power imaginable, he's just this Superman, and he's just sort of, everybody knows Superman. So it's sort of, that takes away his character, it sort of takes away some of his character, because you're like, you can carry a planet, whereas this guy, Batman, he's holding on to the edge of the ledge and trying not to let go. He's a man at the end of his, sanity, right? Batman's sort of this gritty, hardcore man, and Superman doesn't have to worry about falling off a ledge because he can just simply fly. Right? Obviously I know Batman can glide. It's just me trying to make it, like, sound cool. But, like, you know, it goes to show, right? Superman, the Almighty, he's almost like a godlike figure, in the DC universe, right? But, you know, I don't think he's necessarily boring. He can have his cool moments, but I think it's a challenge. I would say he's more, not boring, but I would say these types of characters like Goku and like Superman are challenging to do storytelling with, to tell a good story that doesn't make them weak, it doesn't show them in the weak way, and doesn't undermine them as a character, but also grounds them and makes them the main character of a storytelling, you know? It's really difficult. I think it's a challenge, and I praise every single writer and artist who takes on Superman, because you're trying to come up with a story that's probably already been done, right? Yeah. But I don't think he's necessarily boring. I would say he's sort of a challenging character, to take on, Superman. He can do anything, and he probably has done pretty much everything. Really powerful characters like Goku and, you know, Superman are boring. And I don't agree. I think they're just more challenging to write good, right? But tying into that hot take, you know, we had Absolute Batman, who's this bulking beast. He's not really necessarily overly, really powerful. He's Batman, but, like, with steroids, pumped up to 11, right? It just drags out what Batman, the definition of what Batman is. And it's the same for Absolute Superman. You know, that sort of like, Batman, Absolute Batman is this hulking big figure, whereas the original Batman is this sort of like silhouette of the perfect man, sort of. And Absolute Batman, you know, he's seen as this creature and sort of seen as this bat, and this Batman is sort of maybe exaggerated in the way that is not Batman, it's Batman, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what I'm saying, but it's Absolute Batman, you know. The Absolute the Absolute series of books are pretty interesting concept in comics. You know, you're exaggerating what a character who is usually already exaggerated, and you're exaggerating it times 10. You know, you're giving Superman this awesome Spawn-like cape, and you're pumping up his powers and giving him new sort of sonic powers, crazy, making him even more powerful. But it's not necessarily making him more powerful, making him more cool, more absolute. Same with Absolute Batman. I think they're really interesting. Maybe I should do an episode about the Absolute universe. I've only read Absolute Batman and Absolute Superman. I haven't read, you know, Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman, all those ones. But, you know, it's sort of the same thing, right? They just exaggerate what the character is already known for, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool. So, let's talk about some other hot takes. So we've talked about Infinity War and Endgame ruined the MCU. I don't think it ruined them. I think it derailed it, right? Then we talked about Hawkeye and Green Arrow are the same shit. I think, yeah, they pretty much are. There probably is more, but Hawkeye's probably more developed and more popular in regards of like fandom, I think, and sort of how he's presented. I think Hawkeye takes the cake on that one, right? We talked about really powerful characters like Goku are boring. We just talked about that, obviously. Then we talked about Invincible series down the popularity of the actual comics, which I don't agree with. I think they boost each other. I think fans of the comic enjoy the show for what it is, and the fans of the show indulge in the comics. And then, you know, when somebody indulges in comics, it introduces them to the whole world of comics. And then obviously, if you read to the end of Invincible, you're then going to watch to the show, right? To see how it compares. So they sort of boost each other, right? So there are some hot takes on here that I have no idea because I haven't read the book. So there's one here by Denkata. I don't know how to say your name. Denkata, that's probably wrong. It says, Wonder Woman Historia should be her definitive origins. It's also the perfect backstory for the Amazons. So I don't read Wonder Woman. I haven't read Wonder Woman. I haven't read Wonder Woman Historia. So I can't really speak on that. I'm sorry if this is a disappointment, but maybe I should get into Wonder Woman. But yeah, I haven't read it, so I don't know how to answer that. I don't have an opinion on that. But yeah, I would love to get into Wonder Woman. Like I just said, I didn't read Wonder Woman, Absolute Wonder Woman. I don't really know much of her character, but she seems cool. And then we got Henry saying Zdarsky's Daredevil run is not as bad as people say. So like I said, I haven't read Zdarsky's Daredevil run. So yeah, I can't really speak on that. I've only read The Man Without Fear and Daredevil Yellow. So I'm just getting into Daredevil at the moment. I love Daredevil though. I think he's awesome. If you recommend that, if you're saying it's not as bad as people say, then I will definitely check that out because, like I said, I want to read more Daredevil. So I can't really give you an opinion on that. Sorry about that. I should probably read more comics, right? But there we go. We got okay, this one is the one that I wanted to sort of leave to the end, but yeah, I want to talk about it now because it's a pretty touchy subject for me. ABKB7 on TikTok says, The Long Halloween is mid and the art is horrible. Oh boy. Now this one, it gets me really angry, like that guy from Inside Out when his head goes on fire. I love Long Halloween. I think it's amazing. And I think the art is not horrible. I think it's awesome. I think the art is so unique and fresh and just so cool. I think it's so different, and yes, it is stylized in a way that maybe you might think it is horrible. You know, art is subjective. I say this about everything. Art is subjective. If you open up a comic book and you don't like it and you decide not to buy it, that's your opinion, dude. I don't care. But my opinion is that I liked the art in Long Halloween, and I love the story, and I love the Dark Victory, as well. So I'm gonna have to disagree with that hot take, cause I just love them. But, you know, I can see why people would be controversial about the art. Maybe I'm overglazing it. Maybe I am glazing Tim Cell. Obviously we did a Tim Cell episode, so, I might have overglazed him, you know, but it's my opinion, and I'm allowed to have opinions on my own podcast, right? But I don't think Long Halloween is mid. I think it's one of the best, maybe the best Batman book. I wouldn't recommend it to new comic book readers though, because it's long, and the art, like you said, is sort of subjective and they might think it's horrible because they haven't seen. I would recommend sort of, for new Batman readers, I would always recommend Batman Hush. And people go, oh, everybody recommends that. But it's true. I think Batman Hush is made for that. I think it's got reoccurring characters. It's got Superman in it. It's got Nightwing. It's got Poison Ivy, Riddler, all these characters, Joker, you know, all these characters are in it. And I think it's a great way to transition people from the films into the comics. And, you know, people know these characters. It's not like you don't know who the Joker is or Superman is, right? Yeah. One thing that I wouldn't recommend new Batman readers to do is to pick up the new Batman run by Matt Fraction. I don't think it's good for new readers. And that might be controversial, that might be a hot take, but I think it's sort of maybe maybe it's just too much coolness. You know, I think it's favoriting fanfare. That's what I'm trying to say. Favoriting fanfare, whereas Batman Hush, it gets into the story and it is definitely fanfare in Batman Hush, though. You obviously get Superman versus Batman. But I think the new Matt Fraction is pretty decent. But I wouldn't recommend it to new comic book readers because, you know, you have Tim Drake. You don't really know Tim Drake. You don't really know these characters. And he's got Joker who's, you know, he's sort of paralyzed in water, which doesn't, you know, as a new reader, that's not what you would see Joker as. I think the new Matt Fraction run is maybe for mature Batman readers, somebody who knows the lore, knows the characters, and knows, you know, every single Robin, you know? But yeah, I love Long Halloween. I think it's so good. And if you get mad over that, that's fine. I don't care. You can come at me, because I will happily argue over the Long Halloween and defend it with my life. I will die fighting for Tim Cell and for Jeff Loeb and for the Long Halloween and its brother, Dark Victory. I may be glazing, but hey, we all glaze a little bit sometimes. So yeah, I don't think it's mid. I think the art is beautiful. ABKB7, don't go watch my Tim Cell episode because you might have a heart attack because I overglaze him a lot in that one. But yeah, that was a hot take. So we got, which one should I say next? Let's talk about this one right here by Noodle. I think I'm saying that right. No, I can't speak. I can't speak. I think it's Noodle, right? If I'm saying your name wrong, I'm sorry. But it's Nodeoi, right? Yeah. I'm probably saying it wrong. I'm sorry. But Noodle. He says Titans was actually pretty good. So yeah, let's talk about the Titans TV show, the DC show, featuring, obviously, the Titans or the Teen Titans group. So that's, you know, Dick Grayson, Nightwing, Beast Boy, I'm gonna butcher all these names, but there's Fight. I forgot her name. She's the Star Girl with the orange hair and I haven't watched Teen Titans, so I watched the first show of, I watched the first season of Titans in lockdown, when lockdown hit. I remember it very well. And I thought it was alright, but obviously, that's coming from somebody who doesn't really know Teen Titans really well. I thought it was decent. Now, I do have some things to say about it, because I haven't watched all of the show, but I watched the first season, and then I watched some videos on the Titan show. And I think it has its flaws. I think it lacks that groundedness that maybe it should have had. I think it was trying to be something so extravagant with loads of different DC characters. They introduce, obviously, the Robins, right? So you get Tim Drake's Robin, you get Jason Todd, you get a lot of Bat Fam stuff in the Titans. And I think at the end of the day, as the seasons go on, it sort of goes sort of too far from what that original plan was. You know, you got to remember the title of the series is Titans, you know, DC Titans. So going into the show, you would think that would be like the Teen Titans brought to life, right? Which it kind of is, but it's, I think the whole vibe is off for that show, especially because we've had the animated series of Teen Titans, and the Teen Titans have been very successful as that sort of childlike, goofy animated show, you know. But this sort of live action show with Nightwing and Starfire, is that her name? Starfire? It's sort of very realistic and very sort of gritty, and is very far from the animated show, which is very sort of jokes and colorful and is really awesome. I love the show. I love the animated Teen Titans show a lot. But I think the live action Teen Titans, I don't think that's a good combination, right? To have a superhero team that's been sort of shown as, you know, colorful and bright and funny in this sort of realistic, gritty world where they're beating up bad guys. I think the action is good. I think the action is great. I think the acting and the action scenes are great. Like, I wouldn't say it's a terrible show. I think it has elements that are really good, such as the suits in the show is really awesome. I love the Robin suit, and I think the whole Jason Todd suit is really awesome, and how they have the different looks for each Robin, I think is awesome as well. But I think it definitely has its flaws that maybe helped fuel the fire of its not being as a successful show. But if you enjoy it and if you think it's good, that's great. Enjoy it and watch it, because obviously it has its fan base, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think Titans suffers from having sort of really bad writing. I think it suffers from what a lot of shows in the sort of Arrowverse, I think it's called, suffer from, you know, cheesy sort of bad writing, trying to take itself way too seriously, and the outcome is just an underwhelming mess, I think. But for Titans, I don't think it's that bad. Like, I think it's good on its own. I think, for me personally, I watched all of season 1 and I didn't really have an issue with it. Maybe that's because I don't really know the Titans that well, but I thought it was pretty cool. I think the action's great, like I said. Costume design's awesome. The acting is decent. But I think it suffers also from not focusing on the original Titans. and maybe focusing a little bit too much on the Bat family side of things. So that's Jason Todd, Tim Drake, and Bruce Wayne himself makes an appearance, which apparently I haven't watched the season which he's in, but apparently it's not a very well received depiction of Bruce Wayne. But it doesn't make sense for him to even be there, because it's a Teen Titans, right? And obviously I know it's a DC thing, and but I think it suffers because you have, Nightwing as the leader of the Titans, and I think they take that a little bit too far and maybe favorite him a little bit too much. And then that overtakes the show and makes it a sort of Nightwing show instead of a Titans show. It's a team show, right? And I think that's sort of another thing that they did as well, is you have these handful of heroes in the first season, that I think they did a decent enough job of fleshing out and giving their own personality and introduction. But then they went ahead and added like Superboy and Hawk and Dove or something. And I think you don't need any more characters than the main season 1 cast, because I think it gets a little bit crowded, and I think a show sort of needs to have that groundedness, especially a superhero show. I think the best superhero films and best superhero projects are the ones that are grounded and sort of written really nice and not overly done with cameos, right? So that's just my opinions on it. If you enjoy it, I would agree that it's good. I think it's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's amazingly awesome, but I'd say it's fine. It's good. I agree on that hot take. It's not the best in the world. I would watch it if I was made to. I wouldn't willingly put it on, I don't think. But yeah, I think it's decent. I don't think it's the best in the world. But that's just from somebody who's only watched the first season a couple years ago and don't really know much about the DC Titans. Obviously I love Dick Grayson and the whole Robins and Batman stuff, and obviously I would like that because in the rest of the seasons as the show progresses, they kind of dive into, Jason Todd and Tim Drake. But I don't like when shows do that. They sort of advertise it as Titans, but then it's something that it's not in the actual show itself, right? But yeah, so that was a hot take from Noodles. I'm probably saying your name wrong. Nude. I don't know what. I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to say that was a hot take from TikTok. And yeah, I think it was a pretty good show. I agree. Not 100% agree. I think it's decent. It's fine. Let's stop talking about Titans because we got some other ones to get into here. So let's get into another hot take. So, here's one that I wanted to talk about from Braden on TikTok. I don't know if I'm saying your name there right, but hopefully. So we previously talked about the hot take from the Soups Lad on TikTok, and he said there's not a single perfect live action Batman adaptation. And Braden, says that, he sort of does the opposite and says that his hot take is Robert Pattinson's is the best Batman adaptation because he was actually doing something that he did in the comics, and that's being a detective. In the other Batman films, they don't really show him being the detective. So he's saying that Robert Pattinson's, from the Matt Reeves movie, the most recent Batman adaptation, is the best Batman adaptation. So we talked about it earlier, right? We were talking about all the different adaptations of Batman. And we also talked about Robert Pattinson. And I think it is pretty faithful. But I like to say that the Robert Pattinson's is maybe like an Elseworlds story, movie, trilogy. Obviously they're making the trilogy, right? Well, they're making the second one. I don't know about the third one, but they're making the second one. I think Robert Pattinson's Batman is so beautifully made that it is so awesome, that it is just, you can't ignore it. And I don't want to ignore it, I think it's awesome. But do I think it's a faithful adaptation and the best adaptation of Batman that we've seen on the big screen? It's pretty faithful. It sort of maybe favors, the vibes a bit more, maybe removes sort of, maybe is creating I wouldn't say it's a faithful adaptation from the comics, because it's really not. I think Gotham is very different from what we see in the comics, and Batman's suit is very sort of more realistic, but I don't think that's saying that it's a bad adaptation of the character of Batman, because I don't think it is. I think it takes that adaptation and it expands upon it in certain areas. So, for example, his suit is sort of homemade combat. It almost looks like an army wear, like an army outfit, sort of very handmade and not very like shiny and like something you would think a billionaire would wear, right? Another example is the Batcave is in an underground tunnel that's shut down. I think that's a very sort of that's not in the comics, right? But that's something that they did in the film, and it works really well the same way as a Batcave would. And like I said, Gotham looks very different. But do I think it's a faithful adaptation? I'm gonna say it's a good adaptation of Batman. It's not the most faithful. It's a good one for sure. Because when I watch that film, I always think about the New 52. The suit reminds me of the New 52. The sort of vibe of it, the sort of how it's reinventing Batman, it sort of reminds me of that New 52 Scott Snyder comic book run, which I thought was decent. I thought the comic book run was decent. And obviously in that first film, it's Riddler as the main villain, and obviously in Zero Year, he's the main villain in that. So I think it's a pretty good standalone film franchise. I don't really want to see it in the DCU because I feel like we could do a more faithful comic book Batman, but I think it's so great on its own as its own film. It's making me think of the I think what it does in that film, in that Matt Reeves film, is it takes from certain adaptations that we've seen of Batman. It takes from Christian Bale's Batman, Adam West's Batman. It takes from Michael Keaton's Batman. And I think it obviously takes from the comics as well. And I think it combinizes? What the fuck? That's not a word. I think it combines all of those interpretations, the history of Batman, into one sort of adaptation that is very perfect. It works because I think at its core it is just Batman. But I wouldn't say it's just comic book Batman. I would say it's more of like just a accumulation of all Batman. You know what I mean? I think I really am excited for part 2 of that Batman franchise, and the third one if they do make that one. I think it's recently been revealed that Harvey Dent is going to be played by Winter Soldier actor, I forgot his name. I'm so terrible with names. But he's going to be playing Two-Face, which is awesome. I can't wait to see that. But yeah, I think it works best on its own standalone franchise, because it's very sort of realistic, and it's sort of maybe is more man than bat in the sense that it's more man than superhero. It's more of yes, he is a superhero, but it's less of that sort of niche. When I think superhero, I think Captain America, Superman, saving everybody. It's less of that and more of like a man who's gone through hell, and now he's preventing other people from going through hell any means necessary, right? It's an awesome film. I would love to do a podcast episode just talking about that first film, because it's so revolutionary for that character and how he's produced in live action. And my personal own opinions on that film varied a lot when it first came out. So when the first trailer dropped for Batman, I was not a fan of it. I looked at the trailer, it just looked so overly serious. And I've said this in my comic book movie history episode, that I don't think a comic book movie should be overly serious or overly fun or overly serious or fun or too funny, right? I think it should meet in the middle somewhere. Because it's a comic book. It's a comic book movie. You can't take yourself too serious when you're, a man dressed up as a bat, right? But this film, it does it in a way that makes sense, and it makes sort of a nice, pleasing vibe and aesthetic for the film. Yeah, if you haven't watched it, go check it out, because I think it's a very good adaptation of Batman, but I wouldn't say it's faithful to the comics. So I half agree on you with that hot take. It's sort of, yes, it is it's a great adaptation. And I think it pulls from every single adaptation of Batman we've seen from comics, games, and movies, and it puts it into one big film, and I think it's a great, great film on its own. But is it faithful to, let's say, the comics? I don't think so, in the sense that it's not just pulled straight from the comics. It's pulling from every bit of Batman, which I think is very awesome. So yeah, that is every single hot take. We've talked about it. We've talked about every single hot take that I have. If your name wasn't on here, I am sorry if I missed you. I will maybe apologize to you formally if you approach me and DM me or whatever. I'm sorry if your name's not on here, but yeah, that's just how it is. Those are the hot takes we talked about. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's talk about something else a minute, real quick. So my next episode, my next retrospective episode, I want you guys to pick the comic for me. So as you know, I have been doing some podcast episodes, which is a comic book retrospective, which is where I look back on some of my favorite comic books from my collection. We talk about each panel, each page, and how it represents that character and the future of that character. So we talked about Wolverine Origin, Batman the Killing Joke, and now I want you to pick my next comic book retrospective podcast episode. So I'm going to give you 3 comic books to pick from, and you guys have to let me know. Comment on this TikTok, comment on this podcast episode, or DM me what comic you want to see me talk about. So I'm going to give you 3 comic books from my collection that we can talk about on a comic book retrospective. I have picked out 3 comic books that I really enjoy from my comic book collection, that vary from independent, Marvel, DC, and I want you guys to pick one out for me to do a retrospective podcast episode on that book, talking all things about that book, going through each panel, each page, the artist, the writer, and the overall story, right? So I picked out 3. Let's get into the 3 picks that I picked, and then you got to pick one and let me know what one you want to see on the Nerdiest podcast. Let's go. So the first one that I picked out is The Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman. Obviously a renowned comic book series, but I'll just do the first volume, Days Gone By, in that episode. It won't be the whole series. Obviously, I don't have the whole series, and that'll take hours to do. So it would be the first sort of volume of The Walking Dead by Robert Kirkman. Then the second option for a comic book retrospective episode is Superman Birthright, which is my personal favorite Superman story by Mark Waid. An amazing book. I love it and I would love to talk about it. But it's your choice. So that's The Walking Dead or Superman Birthright. And then the third option for a comic book retrospective Nerdiest podcast episode by your choosing is Weapon X, Wolverine Weapon X. So we've also done Wolverine Origins, which was my first comic book retrospective episode, and I love Wolverine comics. So let's just continue down the theme of Wolverine with Wolverine Weapon X, which is sort of like his second origin, if you will, how he got the metallic adamantium claws. So those are your 3 options to pick. So you got to pick a comic for me to dive into. So that's your options are The Walking Dead, Birthright, Superman Birthright, or Weapon X. Let me know which one you want to see on the Nerdiest podcast. I'd enjoy doing any one of these books. I love comic books. I love talking about comic books. I love the creative process of these books, the coloring, the art, the writing, and you know me, I just nerd out at pretty much anything. But yeah, it's your choice. So Weapon X, Birthright, or Walking Dead, let me know. Get in contact. DM me. Comment on this video with your choice. Alright, until the next one, guys, stay nerdy.